There are powers on Earth too hidden to be seen, and conspiracies too vast to comprehend. For years, the world has seen fact distorted, reality manipulated, and the truth concealed. Join the Pierre Sebac podcast to uncover the real meanings behind ancient aliens and their symbolism.
Hi, this is Pierre Sebac, unlocking the keys to the mysteries. Now, today I thought I would talk about the dialectic. The dialectic is very important in terms of understanding the parallel society, which is this division or dichotomy between heaven and earth. So I thought in order for us to really come to comprehend what I'm talking about with regards to the parallel society, we would look at the dialectic. Now, the dialectic is the basis of the academic and intellectual world within the classical tradition. So in order for us to understand the governments and the structures of governments, the financial world, the intelligentsia and the academic structures, we really need to go into the dialectic, which is the basis between understanding the human and the non-human tradition, which is essentially the occult tradition and this demarcation between human and non-human angels. So first of all, we'll look at the etymology of the word. So the Greek etymology comes from dialectic, which is the art of debate, so dialectic technique. And this is from dialegasthai, which is to converse with. So the dialectic is about the discourse. And it's coming, so there's a relationship, if you like, between dialegasthai, which is to converse with, and dialogos, which is a dialogue, which essentially dia through and legain to speak. Now, this is very important because obviously the dialogue is related to dialogos, which is two words or double speak. So the dialogue also utilizes this codified language. Now, the dialectic is the art of investigating or debating the validity of opinions or the inquiry into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions. So in other words, the dialectic uses argument and counter-argument in order to investigate and extrapolate the external world. Now, the ancient Greeks, they used the term dialectic to refer to various methods of reasoning and discussion in order to uncover the truth. And so this was the basis of the classical educational tradition in terms of the academic tradition. Now, in many respects, it's symbolic in content, and so we find that there is this private, if you like, encryption between dialogos, the dialogue, and its theoretical or its contrivance to dialogos, which is doublespeak. So I think this is very important to understand that the dialectic, although superficially appearing to have arisen from the classical world, is actually based upon occult discourse. It's highly idiomatic and it goes back into an occult tradition. And this occult tradition is essentially the teachings between angels and men and this discourse between angels and men. So it is, in other words, it's codified in dimension. So therefore, the basis of the dialectic is really the academic tradition or the classical tradition. As we said before, the word classis refers to a naval fleet, which in this respect is the angelic tradition. Malak, an angel, is a polymorphic noun of malak, a sailor. So this is really feeding into the academic tradition and is important to understand. So if we go into the Western academia, the dialectic appears in a number of intellectual guises, and so we're finding, if you like, the ideology behind the behind the dialectic within many different philosophical schools, and so this is threaded in within the academic tradition, particularly throughout Europe, but obviously the dialectic can also be found throughout the world because this is universal. So for example, we have the yin and yang sign, which is also another extension of the dialectic. This would be the dialectic within the Oriental or Chinese, within the Chinese tradition. So if we look at a few different philosophers, we can see then that the philosopher Immanuel Kant, he applied the term dialectic to the criticisms or the contradictions which arise from supposing knowledge of objects beyond the limits of experience. So he was looking at this in terms of what we understand in terms of phenomenon, and in terms of the in terms of, for example, the existence of the soul or the existence of God. So this was looking at the relationship between the physical and the metaphysical. Now, interestingly, Hegel utilized the term dialectic as the definition to refer to the process of thought by which apparent contradictions, from which he termed as the thesis and its opposite counterpart, the antithesis, are seen to be part of a higher truth. And this higher truth is the synthesis. So if you like, it's the combining together between the argument and the counter-argument to refer to come to the conclusion of a much more purer essence, which combines the two truths into this purer sense of truth, which is the synthesis. Now, this is obviously found within Marxist ideology as well, in which, if we look at Marx and Engels and the dialectic describes the market forces or the historical forces behind markets. And if we look at this, then Marx himself talked about the thesis, which is feudalism. And then this is, if you like, the combined or is contrasted with the antithesis, which is capitalism. And then finally, if you like, the ultimate solution, which is the synthesis, would be communism. So we're seeing here then that the idea with this within the Greek idea of the discourse, where you have argument and counter-arguments, now these arguments are applied together, come together in order to give a synthesis of ideas. Now this is obviously important because, as I said before, that these ideas are said to originate from angels, and I think that this is important because if you actually look at Marx and Engels, the name Engels is the old Anglo-Saxon name for an angel, and again Marx is an ancient word which would be used to refer to a Martian. Now in this context, the Martian is the Adamic man, and we can see symbolically that Mars is Eden. So for example, if we looked at the etymologies, Adam, man, is related to Adam, which is red, and Machadim, which is Mars, because in the occult tradition the Adamic man is identified with Mars. So it's very interesting that when we look at Marx and Engels, again it's encoding the dialectic, because we have what is essentially the Adamic man, which would be going back to the cherubim tradition, and then we have the angel, which supposedly in this context would be the seraphim, these non-human angels. And so we're seeing this synthesis of ideas between human and non-human angels, or between Marx and Engels, which is the synthesis of coming together, which is communism. In a religious context, particularly within Christianity and Islam, etc., they would talk about the synthesis being the kingdom of God. So that's very interesting to look at how these occult and religious and ideological ideas actually interplay in terms of the dialectic, and how this actually refers to the division between heaven and earth, and also relates to the fall and the coming together of heaven and earth as well. So according to Karl Marx's manifesto, the fiscal processes of economic development, they culminate with the financial imperative, which is communism. And this is, if you like, a type of apotheosis convergent, which is essentially the development of communism, this higher truth. I use the word higher truth not in a literal sense here, but I'm talking about in an ideological sense, which is a synthesis of feudalism and capitalism. So the combining together, if you like, of the thesis, which would be feudalism, the antithesis, which is capitalism, and the coming together of these two ideas to form the synthesis, which in this respect would be communism. So this is the evolution of community ownership. So now the dialectic really originates in the philosophical tradition from Socrates, so the dialectic can be understood as the Socratic method. Now, interestingly, Socrates had a agathodaimon, and he would converse with this agathodaimon, which again is feeding into this idea of the dialectic between heaven and earth, or between human and non-human entities, which is essentially the tradition of the jinn or the daemon. And so that in many respects, if we look at the origins of the dialectic, it is exopolitical in dimension. In other words, we're not just dealing here with the world of men, but we're essentially dealing with the world of angels. And when I use the term angel, I'm really using it to refer to an alien, because anyone who's watched my videos will know by now that the etymology of Zar, an angel, is polymorphic in the ancient Aramaic. The word also means an alien, one who is foreign, one who is strange. And so the angels themselves are typically viewed as being alien. And this is very important to understand. So there is this exopolitical dimension in terms of the dialectic, and this exopolitical dimension is angelic or alien. The two terms are synonymous. So dialectos, which is the discourse or the way of speaking, as we said before, from dialect, it's a bit of a mouthful, I'll try this again, dialeggesai, to converse with, essentially is talking about the dialogue. Now, in terms of the alien dialectic, this is the debate concerning the subject of whether the aliens are real and interact with humans. So in this respect, we are talking about the hypothetical, scientific, philosophical, moral discussions about whether aliens exist. And it's interesting because in many respects it's very complex, and the main questions which are incorporated within the dialectic include: are aliens physical as opposed to spiritual, and the argument's application within exopolitical. Now, as I've said before in these videos, within the ancient world, the deities, the Elohim, the high ones, were viewed as a halache, which is a high creature, but were also identified or described as the Ruach Elohim, which are the high spirits. So the high ones had mastered the waveform. They had mastered physical reality, so they could materialize both physically, but they could also disappear. And this example is what I describe as a holographic culture. In this respect, the holographic culture really is the synthesis. It is the ultimate truth of actually bypassing physical reality in terms of the synthesis of the physical and the spiritual, the temporal and the non-temporal realm. So this is encompassing all these ideas and is extremely complex. So these ideas really are relevant and applicable for exopolitics in terms of trying to get our head around politically what it means in terms of a holographic civilization, how they would interact with mankind, because their interactions with mankind, they've bypassed time, so they can interact with the Roman or the classical world of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years back in time or into the future. So how do these interactions impinge with the world of mankind? These are very interesting philosophical ideas. Now, so as we said before, there is this relationship between the physical and the spiritual. The spiritual in this context would be the waveform, and then we've got the physical, which is the particle. And these applications are found within exopolitics. Now, the important issues which are touched upon then within the alien dialectic obviously include quantum mechanics, and this links into the waveform, which are the scientific principles equated with the mechanization of a holographic culture. So how they can bypass the waveform, how they can manipulate the waveform so that they can walk through walls, they can become spiritual, they can disappear, they can transport themselves from one place to another. So fundamentally, the alien dialectic, it covers both the political dichotomy, which is which relates to the codification of aliens and their control over heaven and earth. And this control is best summed up as the parallel society or the ship of state. In terms of worldly governments, they are depicted or they are imagined as a type of ship which is anchored to heaven. So this is the ship of state. The government, gubernatio, which is to control our navigator ship, is identified with the governments, the ship of state. The ship of state is anchored to heaven, and there is this discourse with the parallel society, this relationship or dialectic between heaven and earth. Now, the parallel society links into their auxiliaries, which are a grafted bloodline. So, as I said before, Zar is an angel or an alien, but is related to Sar in the ancient Aramaic, which is a prince or a commander, typically of a naval vessel. But again, that this links into the idea of kingship within modern English. Again, within the Hebrew and Arabic, there is a relationship between Malak, an angel, and Melech, a king. Again, this would imply kingship. The same is also found within the Greek as well. Archon is an angel or a ruler. So this talks about an earthly ruler and would again be aligned to Nuarchos, which is a ruler or a captain of a naval vessel. Now, this juxtaposition or parallel within the parallel society is referring to the grafted bloodlines, which would be the synthesis. And this is the synthesis of the seraphim cherubim dialectic. As I said before, the occult tradition is split between a human and a non-human tradition. The non-human tradition are the seraphim. The seraphim are non-human angels. They're reptilian in appearance. The word seraphim is translated into the Arabic as a jinn. So again, the seraphim are connected in the symbology to the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits. Now, the seraphim cherubim dialectic, really, again, when we go back into the philosophical tradition, is, if you like, it looks at the thesis and the antithesis and their division. So the division traditionally was highlighted in a war within heaven. This war was known as Titanomachy, which was the war of the Titans. The Titans were this unsanctioned bloodline which were created by the fallen angels, and again, this incorporated humans and non-humans, and it's very interesting because within Greek sculpture in particular, you will see sometimes that there are combinations of motifs. So, for example, the Titans will be represented as giants, and then you'll have humanity, which are represented as small, and then you'll have motifs of serpents, which are the seraphim or this non-human component, and these are combined together. And again, this goes back into the traditions of the Titanomachy, or the war within heaven, the war of the Titans. So within exopolitics and this seraphim cherubim tradition or dialectic, which is essentially the division between the parallel society or heaven and earth, or the division between human and non-human angels, we have also the dialectic, which is the exotheological dialectic. And again, the exotheological dialectic contains a number of interesting ideas. So, and it's centered on the discourse or the division between, if you like, the contention which surrounds the Elohim and their status as living gods versus the counter-argument that Yahweh is the one absolute God. Now, again, this is a controversy which is found within religion. So this idea that the gods, that the Elohim either relate to the personification of an absolute God, or that the Elohim, that they are just living gods. And I think that this is important as well when we look at the exotheological arguments. It's extremely complex, and the issue regarding, and it really centers on the issue of the enotheistic nature of God, which is found within Judaism. And this is a belief which posits that Yahweh is the sovereign leader, a supreme deity who rules over the host, including all of their deities within heaven. So within ancient Judaism, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the hosts, and again the word Sabaoth relates to Sevet, which is a crew, and Teva, which is a vessel. So we're dealing here with an angelic deity or a god, the Elohim, the high ones, but he is a commander of the host. He commands or presides over heaven. And this is very interesting because within the later traditions, this enotheistic aspect of God, who is, if you like, the ultimate God who is worshipped, but he has these lesser deities or angels underneath him. This then, in the later traditions, becomes a monotheistic belief. and Yahweh therefore ceases to take on these scatological motives in terms of the boats and the ships and the vessels, which were depicted as shields or wheels, and takes on this absolute aspect of being an absolute God. And so this is, if you like, the dichotomy between henotheism, which is the belief in one deity who presides in heaven over multiple deities, and then this reduction to a monotheistic God. And that, as I said before, is really the basis of the scatological tradition. The scatological tradition in this context is the study of angelic vessels, the angelic ships or vessels within religion and mythology. As I've said before, this is a classified tradition. It goes back to classis, which is a naval fleet. So this is a naval tradition, but it is the occult tradition in terms of the symbolism between heaven and earth, and how this actually interlinks with boat symbolism and boat iconography, which are symbols or signifiers of the angelic sailor. So the traditions then are compartmentalized, particularly within the religious traditions, between this enotheism, God presiding in heaven over many deities, and then monotheism. And again, in the ancient world, these belief systems seem to have been very sectarian and very divisive. They were part of the discourse or the dialogue from which different sacerdotal or priestly factions expressed these ideas very differently. So and the exopolitical dimension therefore feeds into the political and geopolitical dimension as well. And I think that this is very important to emphasize, that in terms of the religious ideas themselves are not just isolated, but they actually feed into the political and geopolitical ideas. And so the idea of one God versus multiple gods, again, is at the basis of a lot of conflict which we found within the ancient world. And we see then the division, if you like, between human and non-human angels, and these divisions which are played out in terms of conflict, because, as I said before, the priesthood themselves, they are identified or affiliated to either human angels or non-human angels, the cherubim or the seraphim. And we see this division or dialectic played out not just within the religious dimensions, but also within the political dimensions as well. And so I just want to explore some of these ideas about how states are actually divided up, and that there are, if you like, an occult basis for the division of the divisions of states, and how they are affiliated to different angelic factions. So the idea of creating the division to combine or to synthesize ideologies are found throughout the world, and this is very much evident politically within the nationalist splits within the following states. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of how we find these divisions, and these divisions tend to be based upon religious and occult religious ideas, which when we break them down are often very occult within the dimensions. So, for example, we've got divisions between Northern and Southern Ireland. We have a similar division between East and West Germany. And again, these divisions are now being resolved, which is the synthesis. And this is very interesting because the synthesis suggests, particularly from the religious dimension, suggests the kingdom of God. But again, from the Greek tradition, the apocalyptein, which is to reveal, is ultimately disclosure. So the revelation is linked into this idea of the synthesis of ideologies, which goes back to the synthesis of states and the coming together of the thesis and the antithesis, which is the synthesis. Again, we see a similar division within North and South Korea, which again, if we believe the discussions with what's going on in America, that these divisions will be resolved, and I think that they'll be resolved fairly shortly. I don't know if they're going to be resolved through conflict or through negotiation, but the intention is to bring together all of these separate different factions, these different countries, the thesis and the antithesis, into an ultimate synthesis. And this, behind this, is the ultimate, which is disclosure, which is the apocalypse. Similarly, we have similar divisions with Taiwan and China, which were the nationalist and communist splits, or North and South Vietnam, which was at latitude 17 north. Again, North and South America, similar divisions, or India and Pakistan. It's very interesting to me that Jinnah created the state of Pakistan, but the Sanskrit word for Jinnah means one who's conquers. And again, there is this etymological idea between Jinnah, a conqueror, and Jinn, which is a type of non-human spirit, or the jinn, which are a race of interdimensional species, which fit into the Ruach Elohim, the high spirits, or the Elohim. So as you can see then, the various different examples between North and South Ireland, between North and South America, or India and Pakistan, these are all ideas of dividing humanity, and dividing humanities upon various different splits, religious splits. I suggest to the audience that these splits are actually, when we fundamentally break it down, and we found this certainly within the classical world with Zeno and Plato and the Pythagorean school, that the split really goes down between the middle, between non-human angels, which are the seraphim, and then you've got the division with the cherubim, which are these proto-human angels. Now, these splits within states are there to control nation states. They're there to divide people politically, to divide them ideologically, ethnically, religiously. So these divisions are put there in place in order to control people, but the ultimate intention is to bring together a synthesis of the human race, and then as an extension of this synthesis of the human race, an extension or a reuniting of heaven and earth, which is the symbolism which is found within the scatological tradition. So, and it's very interesting because these political divisions go all the way back into prehistory, which are essentially the divisions between human and non-human angels. So if you like, if we go back into the creation and the divisions of mankind, we can say that they're particularly expressed through class struggle, which is the exploitation of the Adamic man, which is the Homo sapien. As I've said before, the Homo sapien is this conduit between races, between the cherubim, which are the proto-human angels, and then the seraphim, which are a non-human race of angels. And it seems that the Adamic man is this conduit, or is compatible sexually with both of these two different divisions, which form the dialectic. The dialectic, which is an extension of the Paro society, or heaven and earth. Now, the Adamic man is a wordplay on the Egyptian Arabic kadam, which is a servant. So the Adamic man is understood to be a servant of heaven. And again, the division between heaven and earth has always been centered upon whether man would rule himself, which, as we find, that this is where we find this within the Zeno and Platonic schools within classical philosophy, or whether man would be subject to the rule of the Elohim. So this is essentially the dialectic. So if we can see then, if we looked at the history of humanity in terms of the dialectic, we would see that the thesis is the beginning of mankind, which is the anthropos, and this is factional of the cherubim, or proto-human. So the Anthropos is one of the original races, which is the cherubim. It's one of three original races, which I argue is the cherubim. Then in the Anthropos we also have the seraphim, and then this grafted lineage, which is created from this Adamic man, but which is very distinct from the Adamic man. So the beginning then of the Adamic man is when his seed was planted onto the earth, and this seems to have been related to a war in heaven which wiped out humanity, and then humanity was then planted onto the earth. Now the antithesis is the adaptation of the proto-human by the seraphim and the planting of the Adamic man on the earth. This is known as the second creation, and then the synthesis is what we are moving towards, which will be the Homo noeticus, or the grafted or neophyte. This is the apoptosis convergence. So this is the coming together of the synthesis to create something which is greater than the sum total, arguably. because again there are different interpretations to this. There is essentially within the occult tradition the Pythagorean and the Euclidean dialectic. I don't want to go into that at the moment here because I think that's quite complicated and I think it really deserves its own video. We can essentially summarize the Pythagorean and Euclidean dialectic as follows. Pythagoras is Pythonagoras, which would be the speaker of the serpent. Euclides, good glory, is a diptych paranomasia on the Arabic word Euclid, which is to copy. Now, Euclid is famous for his treatise on geometry, so therefore, if you like, the name Euclid in Arabic means to copy the external world. It means to ape or to copy, and it's coming from the Arabic noun kurd, which is an ape. So the Euclidean tradition is said to be human. It's coming from this human tradition, and this is very important. And the Pythagorean tradition is coming from the Seraphim tradition, and this is the dialectic within Greek philosophy, the revelation between non-human angels, which are the Seraphim, which are the Pythagorean tradition, expressed through the philosophies of Pythagoras, and then we have the contrast expressed through the Euclidean tradition. Similarly, if you like, Homer as well. The Latin word homo means man. Again, this would be the history of the human tradition, and this is the dialectic. Now, as you can see then, the dialectic runs throughout politics, it runs throughout religion, it runs throughout the intelligentsia and is the basis of the classical world. And I think therefore it's useful for us to look at the divisions. As I've said before, within the classical world the divisions were primarily between the Pythagorean and Euclidean school, or the division between the Seraphim and the Cherubim. But also we're seeing the similar types of divisions between the religious denominations as well, and these classifications are found throughout religious divisions of the priesthood. So behind these major partitions, we can find that these polar views that they encode the Seraphim Cherubim dialectic are these two different agents which have imparted knowledge to mankind. Now these two agents again are an extension of the powerhouse society, this extension between heaven and earth, between that which is human and that which is non-human, which are composed of the anthropos, which are the three principal races which are identified in the ancient world. And we can see therefore that the split within the priesthood can be summarized very simply. So the Seraphim Cherubim split are found within Christianity, within the Protestant and Catholic split. Within Islam it would be the Sunni and Shiite split. Within Judaism you would find these types of splits found within the Sephardic and Ashkenazi. Within Buddhism the split would be the Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. And again within Hinduism you've got the split between Vaishnavism and Shaivism. So these, if you like, are the Seraphim Cherubim split. And this therefore takes us on neatly to what I describe in my book Holographic Culture as the Seraphim Cherubim dialectic. Now in many respects it's equivalent to the alien dialectic. So we're seeing there that there is this split between the Seraphim and the Cherubim, and it describes the events which led up to panspermia and the second creation. So Titanomachy, which is this war in heaven, created the split between the Cherubim and the Seraphim, and this split then becomes reunited through the synthesis, which is the synthesis which relates to the synthesis of humans and non-human angels at the literal level. So this split between the Seraphim and the Cherubim had massive implications here on the earth. It led into political divisions and factions between sanctioned bloodlines and non-sanctioned bloodlines, and essentially led to war across the planet, and we're still feeling these reverberations today. So as a result of the war in heaven, and as a result of the human species nearly being annihilated, sections of the human race were recreated, they were tampered with, and they were recreated as the Adamic man, which is known as the second creation. This is found within the Quranic tradition, but is also found within the Greek tradition as well, of panspermia, which details the planting of the Adamic man upon the face of the earth. And this really does appertain also to class as well, because as I said before, Classis is a naval fleet, which in this respect is referring to the classical tradition, which is classified. The classical tradition is the angelic tradition, and therefore the division between class is really the division between angels and men, which is played out through the dialectic, or played out through the parallel society, which the parallel society is elaborated through the ship of state. The ship of state is a mirror of heaven in terms of the angelic boats which are moored to heaven and earth. So we're seeing these sectarian divisions which are played out throughout the parallel society, and which are found throughout class between human and non-human. Again, we find this relationship also within governments. Shilton, which is a government, the Hebrew word is related to Shaitan, which in the original context is an adversary, but this could also refer to a political adversary. So the governments themselves are based upon the dialectic, which is the division, and they're adversarial. They are competitive, adversarial, oppositional, and if you look at the literal word, they're therefore satanic. So the dialectic links into the division between angels and men and the fall of creation. So class itself is based upon difference, the difference between heaven and earth, between angels and men. And again, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because as I've said before, the angels themselves are divided amongst the dialectic between two main branches of angels, which are found within the occult tradition, between the seraphim, non-human angels, and then the cherubim. And these are factions of the dialectic. So again, if I wanted to just look at the parallel society very quickly and sum this up, we would say therefore that the alien dialectic can also be expressed as the dialectic between the seraphim, which are non-human angels, and the cherubim, which are these proto-human angels. Again, the dialectic is then distilled through the secret societies, and are found also within the philosophical schools, which are also an extension of the secret society network. And so we have the secret societies which hide both the alien tradition and the human tradition. And so the secret societies themselves are partitioned with this knowledge and are affiliated either to human or non-human angels. And this is important because this is at the basis of the dialectic. Within the political system, the dialectic would describe the upper house, which describes the Elohim, the high ones, lordship, those who are born of a boat or a vessel, and then commons, which is the human, one who is common. So this is how the dialectic plays out. So just to sum up then, the dialectic is at the basis of the intellectual tradition. It's the basis of the academic, the political, the religious, the relationship or interrelationship between angels and men, and in particular this dichotomy between the seraphim, which are non-human angels, and then the cherubim, which are the proto-human angels, and the synthesis or the coming together of these divisions. Okay, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then please give me a thumbs up. Again, I would ask that you try and pass these videos around, and also let's try and make this a better world. Thank you for listening. It's great to be back on talking again about these ideas. Thank you very much. Thank you again. This is Pierre Sabat.